support.
The maestro, please.
To be fair, I really should have seen this one coming, cause today we're gonna be talking about What I Want by Morgan Wallen featuring Tate McRae.
Morgan Wallen.
The second time we're doing Morgan Wallen, because the first time we did
I know that last night we let the liquor talk. I can't remember everything.
Since then, and despite all the controversies, he's managed to get even more hit songs, such as
When you're tasting what he's drinking, are you thinking about me? When you're riding where he's driving, are you
as well as
long live cowgirls, never gonna settle on down, girls. Leave you in a
Tate McRae.
Tate McRae is a Canadian singer, first getting pop notoriety with her song
You broke me first.
That being said, most people know her nowadays because of
So sure of yourself, baby, don't get greedy. That shit won't it.
Background.
What I Want was originally released on May 16th, charting at the end of May, just 2 weeks later, all the way at number 1. What I Want is the 5th single off of Morgan Wallen's most recent and 4th studio album, aptly named in my opinion, I'm the Problem. The album was also released on May 16th, and the other 4 singles would be
lies, lies, lies. Look into my eyes, eyes, eyes. I'm still a fool. I just wanna love somebody who won't ever guess I'm the problem. And your mess never do no wrong if I'm
and finally,
but I never fall in love, baby, just in case you wake up wanting me out of the blue.
Minus Morgan Wallen and Tate McRae, credits on this song include J Cash, Charlie Handsome, John Byron, Joe Reeves, and Joey Moi. We last talked about J Cash last time we talked about Morgan Wallen, though since then, he's gotten some new pop credits under his belt.
'Cause I'll be single soon. I'll be single soon.
As well as some country crossover to pop hits.
What's someone as beautiful as you doing right around with someone like me?
Charlie Handsome is another repeat, also from last night, and has also continued to get a various number of pop hits, some in the hip-hop realm,
Pull up on your bitch like zoom.
and also some in the country realm.
Yeah, looking back at it now, this town's been too good to us. Race held on the weekend.
And John Byron is yet another repeat from last night, more sticking to more of the country realm though, with his more recent pop credits such as
Somebody pour me a drink, somebody bum me a smoke. I'm about to get on a bus.
and
After all the bars are closed, tell me where you want.
Joe Reeves is our first and only newcomer on this lineup, getting pop hits, doing some hip-hop songs.
I'm popping away, feel the walls in my brain and they're caving in. Outside those walls.
And in continuing the trend along country music as well.
Yeah, this one's for the losers.
Finally, we have the return of Joey Moi, who again we talked about during last night, but since then hasn't gotten any other big pop credits, such as, well, this one. What I Want is released jointly by Big Loud, Republic, and Mercury.
Form.
What I Want is a country pop song, just over 3 minutes long, A major, 4/4 time, and 116 beats per minute. The song, after the intro, actually starts with the first chorus,
She said you don't want this heart, boy, it's already broke.
which is then followed by a post-chorus.
That's what I want, that's what I want.
Only then do we get the first verse,
And you ain't gotta worry about no trust issues with me, I got them too.
and even only then do we get the first pre-chorus.
If you're in a hurry.
That leads us finally to our second chorus, and the first time Tate McRae actually shows up in the song.
Told me everything she touched just goes up in smoke.
They both obviously then continue into the second post-chorus.
That's what I want, that's what I want.
We then get the second verse, done by Tate McRae,
Sometimes in the morning, go back to being small, you never know.
along with the second pre-chorus, mostly done by Tate McRae, because Morgan Wallen jumps in at the end.
If this is how it is,
Then she kissed me again.
We then have our third and final chorus, which is extended,
Only stay a couple nights, then she gon' be gone.
as well as our last post-chorus, which is also extended.
That's what I want, that's what I want.
We then get a little outro by Tate McRae, simply repeating stuff from the post-chorus,
that's what I want, that's what I want.
and then that obviously ends the song.
acoustic guitar.
Really the first thing we hear in the entire song, doing this sort of arpeggiated figure, doing B minor 7 for 2 bars, A major, and then E major with that little 7th add at the end, and it does this pretty much throughout the entire song.
Dulcimer.
While I do think it's a synth patch and not an actual dulcimer, we do hear it throughout various points in the song, doing this back and forth 8th note pattern, mostly focusing around that A, and even getting as low as that A at the bottom, but it is just a 2-bar phrase that repeats.
Electric guitar.
We also hear the electric guitar in the very beginning of the song, really underneath the acoustic guitar, doing these syncopated and very long held out notes going D, C sharp, G sharp. Other than that, it sporadically appears behind certain other elements, like this part right here is probably the most dynamic part that it does in the song, with this combination of these 16th note and 8th note runs down.
Slide guitar.
A staple in country music, we first hear it also in the background at the beginning, really on those last 2 bars, especially you can hear that pitch bend towards the end. Similarly to the electric guitar, it comes out sporadically throughout the song, but its most iconic line happens when transitioning from one section to another, like here, started off on that very low E, working its way all the way up to that pitch bend F sharp at the very end.
Pad.
Kind of the supporting harmonic figure in the song, it really does the same thing throughout, given it's very buried between everything else that goes on. B minor for 2 bars, then going to A major, before finally going to that E major over B chord.
Bass.
The bass primarily exists in this song as a bass guitar, first hitting that B and then going down to the B an octave below it, going back up to A before ultimately ending on E. It does have additional figures throughout the song, but really sticks to that same kind of harmonic language. For example, here we have B, then it hits another B an octave up, but still goes down to that A and still ends on that E. You can see it here again, a completely different rhythmic figure, but still focusing around that B for 2 bars, going down to A, and then going down to E. But I did say primarily exists as a bass guitar, not entirely, because we do get a more hip-hop oriented bass during the thicker textural parts of the song, but again, still sticking around that same harmonic figure, that low B, going up to A, and then ending on E, with a little drop off at the end.
Chorus.
Fairly simplistic chorus, but hey, a chorus typically is in order to be really catchy. We don't really span much melodic range, just that A to C sharp.
She said, you don't want this heart, boy, it's already broke. Told me everything she touched just goes up in smoke.
Additionally, we only really ever get one melisma throughout the entire chorus, and it's on the word I at the end with what I want at the end of each chorus.
Only stay a couple nights, then she gon' be gone. I said, baby, you should know that's what I want.
Now, the benefit of starting simple is you can get increasingly more complex with not that much effort. Here we have an additional line done in harmony with Tate McRae over Morgan Wallen, and we even have an additional layer of Tate McRae at the end, making 3-part harmonies.
She said, you don't want this heart, boy, it's already broke. Told me everything she touched just goes up in smoke.
Now, that thick harmonic texture is only done once in the second chorus. As you can see here, we do go back to just the 2 of them, one layer of Tate McRae above Morgan Wallen. You will notice that she is slightly different in her rhythms, though.
Only stay a couple nights, then she gon' be gone. I said, baby, you should know that's what I want.
It's when we get to the third chorus that we get those three-part harmonies constantly.
And say you don't want this heart, boy, it's already broke. Told me everything she touched just goes up in smoke.
There are some slight adjustments to Tate McRae's voice in the middle, but for the most part it's to make room for those voices at the top. Primarily done in octaves, but not always with Morgan Wallen's part.
Only stay a couple nights, then she gon' be gone. I said, baby, you should know that's what I want.
When we get to the third chorus's extended part, we get an additional link between the two sections from Tate McRae up top, but again it's mostly just the same in three-part harmonies.
She said, you don't want this heart, ma, it can't be fixed. And I ain't ready to try on a night like this.
When we get to the final part of the third chorus, it is mostly just two-part harmonies now, because Tate McRae's line over top of everything is now doing more of ad-libs, except for at the very end.
But if you still wanna stay, there ain't nothing wrong. I said, baby, you should know that's what I want.
Post-chorus.
The post-chorus, melodically speaking, isn't that much more complex than the actual chorus, given it does go lower, so it has a slightly larger melodic range, but it is much more rhythmically complex because it's very syncopated.
That's what I want, that's what I want. That's what I want, that's what I want, that's what I want.
The second post-chorus, just like the second chorus, does get more complex because we now have Tate McRae in there as well. Unlike the chorus, though, it's not primarily harmonies, it's more of a back and forth, making it a bit more rhythmically and texturally interesting.
That's what I want, that's what I want. That's what I want, that's what I want, that's what I want. That's what I want.
In the final post-chorus, we get more of what we've had before, this sort of back and forth between Morgan Wallen and Tate McRae, but we have this additional line from Tate McRae over top of everything else in the background.
That's what I want, that's what I want. That's what I want, that's what I want, that's what I want. That's what I want.
Just like the final chorus, the final post-chorus does have an extension as well, giving much more melismas, more melodically and rhythmically complex from Tate McRae, and even having a bigger melisma from Morgan Wallen at the end.
Yeah, that's what I want, that's what I want, that's what I want. That's what I want.
Verse.
Morgan Wallen's verse is melodically a bit more interesting, but mostly because it goes even lower. In fact, the highest note he hits is just that C sharp. Rhythmically speaking, though, a lot more interesting. Very syncopated between the back and forth between 8th notes and 16th notes.
You ain't gotta worry about no trust issues with me. I got them too. I got them too.
That being said, the verse pretty much just repeats itself with only some changed lines.
You ain't gotta worry about no exes, that's crazy. I got them too. You know I do.
Tate McRae's voice is similarly low and doesn't really ever get that high, but at least she hits the E on the backup vocals. Regardless, you'll notice that it's still more rhythmically interesting, 16th notes and 8th notes, and as I mentioned, we do have that additional backup vocal line she does at the end.
There are no hard feelings if you only wanna act like lovers do. For a night or two. Oh yeah.
Unlike Morgan Wallen's, though, the second part of Tate McRae's verse is a bit more interesting and not just the same, mostly because it has added harmonies with herself.
Sometimes in the morning, go back to being someone you never knew. You never knew.
Pre-chorus.
Finally getting to the pre-chorus, again, still very low, only hitting that C sharp, but it's the first time we actually get half notes in the song.
If you're in a hurry, now you ain't gonna hurt me tonight.
It essentially repeats minus the very end because obviously we're transitioning into the chorus.
It won't be the worst thing if this is all it is, and in the middle of a kiss.
When Tate McRae does the pre-chorus, it is essentially the same, a couple of changed notes, but obviously she has a second line underneath everything an octave higher.
Baby, don't you worry. You ain't gonna hurt me tonight.
And similarly, it's mostly the same except for the end, especially because now Morgan Wallen jumps in on that last phrase before we get to the following chorus.
It won't be the worst thing if this is how it is. Then she kissed me again.
Outro.
Only a 2-bar outro, and it is just kind of taken from material in the post-chorus, slightly different melodically, but the big thing is that there's a vocal effect put on the end, which emulates almost a trill.
That's what I want, that's what I want.
It was inevitable, especially given his constant popularity, and you'll know that if you watch Record Rundown, that we would do this song, or at least a song from the new album. I didn't think it would be this one, I actually thought it was going to be the title track. Regardless though, it is nice to hear Tate McRae kind of bounce back and forth with Morgan Wallen. Not saying Morgan Wallen's bad, but you know, we hear a lot of him these days. But hey, at the end of the day, I guess
This is all it is, and in the middle of a kiss, she said, you don't want this heart, boy, it's already broke. Told me everything she touched just goes up in smoke. Only stay a couple nights, then she gon' be gone. I said, baby, you should know that's what I want.
at least on the bright side, we're doing a pop analysis about him right off the bat as the album comes out, because if his last one is anything to go by, we're going to be talking about this one for quite some time, so at least I can push people to the pop analysis playlist.
That's what I want, that's what I want. That's what I want, that's what I want, that's what I want. That's what I want.